Yeah, the idea that disabled people are broken and that there's something to be accommodated is so profound and horrifying. Have you any of you heard of the comedian called Jess Tom? She's a comedian who uses a wheelchair and she's got Tourette's. And she spoke about one time when she went to see a play, and because she had Tourette's, she was just wheeled out and put in like an audio cupboard and watched it on the film.
That's horrible.
And yeah, I can't imagine that. I'm just thinking you're something to be wheeled away, something to be ashamed of. So I think that's what we're talking about. And you make, it's not about accommodating, it's about building a place where not only is everyone welcome, it's everyone is comfortable. A place where you make reasonable adjustments. That's just just add a little bit. And you think if you've got if you open yourself out to 100% of the people who could work in your field, then you can take the best of that, no matter what stripe they may be. But if you go, I'm only going to go with the able-bodied, the people who look like me, the people who I like the look of, you're going to end up with a large percentage of just mediocre people who are going to provide mediocre results. So I think we'll go with, I think we've got time for one more question and then we'll go on to the wild card. When we have problems, a massive problem with patriarchy, and particularly with men, and we're seeing this with a lot of like the not all men movement, the people who come about go when it's International Women's Day, or World International Men's Day, or the contrarian people who just they don't care. And the way you get people to care is to foster empathy for people who you don't understand their experience. So I'm wondering is there a way that through gaming we can foster that sense of empathy? Because like we were saying earlier, anyone can be disabled at any time. And people just don't think about it because it's a horrible thing to think, oh, if I was in a car crash. But I think with my minor forearm problems, I was thinking, shit, what if I got hit by a car and I couldn't use my hands anymore? That would rob me of the gaming world that I rely on to give me so much positivity. Caroline, can you think of ways that through gaming we can foster that sense of empathy?
I think that it's when you say through gaming, I think one of the joys of gaming is because of the immersive nature of it, through telling good stories, through telling good events and making people feel in worlds, there is an opportunity for fostering empathy. And I mean, I'm very aware that for years I was shit on supporting disability and understanding the depth, and I think so many people are, the depth of barriers that exist to the disabled community in this country. And I mock her all the time because she's a lovely friend, but Dr. Hannah Barron-Brown was hugely influential in this changing, because in 2019, her and I ran an election campaign together in Leeds, and she was candidate, I was running the campaign, and suddenly everything I thought I knew about running a campaign was different. I couldn't send the candidate up to knock on people's front doors because Hannah's wheelchair isn't going to get up to most people's front doors. In fact, most people's front doors are up some steps behind a gate. They have gravel that's not very good unless you have one of a really super swanky wheelchair. Didn't realise as well in those days that, Hannah had to crowdfund for her first wheelchair and has spent years saving up for her later ones. The fact that you don't just get a super swanky wheelchair if you need it.
No one just gives you a wheelchair.
No. Well,
yeah,
you could appeal to charities, but that's charity. So.
Yeah, but it's like, if you want to get a really cool one, like, Hannah's is basically like Dr. Charles Xavier's. So,
I know, it's fancy, isn't it?
And we would go to pubs, we would organise, let's all meet up at a pub so that voters can come and talk to the candidate. And of course, no pub is accessible. Finding a properly accessible pub, or you will ring up the pub and they'll say, yeah, we are accessible. Turns out they have a ramp that they haven't taken out of a cupboard for 15 years. Nobody knows how to operate. Or on one occasion where they had an electric thing, they actually got Hannah stuck in it. we were trying to leave the pub and they couldn't get the key to turn it down, and they just said, oh, hang on, we'll be back, and walked off. And so for 15 minutes, Hannah and I were just standing next to a wheelchair lift going, this is shit. And when we actually went to the council for the briefing and said, is the council chamber accessible? We were told, nobody's ever asked us that before. Now, like, obviously, you're like, what's this got to do with gaming? And I think the point is that the same is true of gaming. I know people who said to me, I've never been able to game because of my cerebral palsy. It was somebody else who said that the controllers have never worked for me. And there are some great organizations out there doing their bit to try and make it work. But the social model of disability is so powerful because it's saying, it's not that you're putting these barriers up, you as a society are putting these barriers up. So I think the way that gaming can help is to look at what barriers are we putting up.
Yeah, Jem, have you do you feel like gaming feeds into your empathy, like for other people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the great thing about gaming is that it gives you the opportunity to play as somebody else, to literally walk in somebody else's shoes. So I think there is so much scope within games to help us to understand what life is like for other people and what life is like as for somebody different from ourselves in a way that we just can't. And I think, that doesn't just have to be about providing diverse characters, but I mean, that would be my starting point, would be to provide the opportunity to play and experience life in many different ways in a game, but it's also about having the opportunity to role play in a game, and I mean, role play is I think some people feel a bit like ooh about it, because I think most people have come across it in uncomfortable scenarios where you're having to role play out something in the workplace or at school or something like that. And I think or it's like really geeky because it's people dressed up with elf ears and great big swords and things like that. So I think there's a bit of a discomfort about it. But when I used to game, I played different characters and I explored different aspects of my personality and the ways that I wanted to be, and I could go on and I mean, one of my characters that I played in World of Warcraft, I did an entire blog based on her experiences and how she viewed the world. And although she didn't have any disabilities, she was a little gnome, so she was tiny, and she hung out with an elf warrior who was enormous. And a lot of the stories that we talked about were about the size difference and the experiences of him being this big and her having to keep up and hiding in places where he couldn't fit and she couldn't, and all of this. And so it gave me an opportunity to explore what life would be like in this completely fictional character. And I think so from an empathy perspective, I think it's a really good way for us to, just like reading gives us the opportunity to explore other people's lives, I think gaming gives it, and it because our emotional response doesn't recognize that it's just pretend, the more engaged we can get in a game, the more we can feel it. So then we can feel in our core what it's like to be this person. And no, it's never going to be exactly the same as that person's experience, but it might give us the ability to look at them and go, hey, do you know what? I might make my workplace a bit more accessible for these people. I might consider what it might be like not to be able to see or to have a mental illness or, whatever. There's all sorts of things. And I think it just gives us, there's a huge scope that can already be explored within the existing games, but could also be factored in when people are designing games going forward.
Yeah, Alex, is this something you're finding, that empathy is something that gaming has allowed you to cultivate more, and that thinks that it could cultivate someone to your experience of life?
I certainly think so, yeah. I'm going to mention a couple of things. There was an indie game that came out, or is coming out recently, about you play as a woman with Alzheimer's. I forget the name, but it looks really good. So I'd build on that sort of model and maybe look across the whole spectrum of disability, because obviously just because I have cerebral palsy doesn't mean that I automatically understand every disability there is and what life is like for, say, a visually impaired person or a deaf person or a person with a learning disability. I have no idea. And I need to do more to rectify that and become more aware of what their lives are like day to day. On the flip side of what Jen was saying, looking at how gaming lets us live different lives and have different experiences. Part of the thing I was referencing earlier about putting my disability to the side, when I was younger, I suppose I had a lot of internalized ableism where I didn't like that part of myself. So I used gaming as, like, when I was playing as Lara Croft, for example, I could be a person that runs around and jumps and climbs stairs and shoots people and does all this amazing physical stuff. And it helped me to feel, in some sense, that I could leave that part of myself behind. But I think if we could make games that could show the experience of disability in more of a real way, in the way that this indie game, whose name I've unfortunately forgotten, does quite well from the sound of it, then it would be an excellent way of exploring disability and understanding disability. Certainly.
Yeah.